Good evening, everyone. I'm John Rowe, Mayor of the City of Portsmouth, and this is the public work session of the Portsmouth City Council, and I'm calling this meeting to order. It's scheduled for 5 p.m. Today, Tuesday, October 13, 2020. The first item of business is to find out who's here, and so, Madam Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Battle,
Here.
Mr. Clark,
Here.
Mr. Glover,
Here.
Mrs. Lucas Burke,
Here.
Mr. Moody,
Here.
Ms. Simmons,
Here.
Mayor Rowe.
Here. Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, this is a virtual meeting that is being conducted today, and it's also being live streamed on Facebook, and it will be available for viewing once this meeting is adjourned at the normal places that the City Council and the city post its videos of meetings. And so in accordance with Governor Ralph Northam's declaration of a state of emergency due to the COVID-19 virus, his executive order number 51, which he signed on March 12, 2020, and the local declaration of emergency ratified by the Portsmouth City Council. And because of the COVID-19 pandemic, which is continuing throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia and our country, this meeting of the Portsmouth City Council is being held by video conference on today, Tuesday, the 13th of October, 2020, without a quorum of City Council members present in the City Council chamber. And we're doing this in order to limit the likely spread of the coronavirus. And this is in accordance with City Council Resolution 2020-21 and 2020-184. Each member of City Council is participating from their home or some other remote location, and I'm in the City Council chamber. And again, we do have 100% attendance. I might note that this is the first work session that we've had probably in 4, 5, 6 months since March of 2020. And again, this is a work session, and so that everybody knows what lies ahead during the work session, let me go over the agenda. Well, the first item is an appeal from our Historic Preservation Commission pertaining to a particular property in Port Norfolk. The second is a briefing by the city manager and his staff about the upcoming 2020 General Assembly session and the legislative packages for that we will develop for the 2021 session of the General Assembly and for the Congress that will meet in the year 2021. We also need to go over our meeting procedures going forward. The next item is a briefing by the city manager on the CARES Act funding. We also have asked for a status report on the wage increase that was included in the 2020-2021 budget that was put on hold depending our several months experience in the first quarter of the current budget year. Also, we have the consideration, the report back. We asked the city manager to bring us back information on the proposal to provide supplements, bonuses to our retirees. And then lastly, we've had an item before us for at least 2.5, if not 3 years, and that's the extension of utilities into the West Norfolk area to promote industrial and economic development. And so that, I think, takes us through 6 items. The 7th item is we need to discuss the recruiting process for filling the position of the city attorney. Now, having said all that, we come to the first item on the agenda, which is the appeal from the Historic Preservation Commission. And the process is that we'll give each party 10 minutes to present their case. And we'll start with the applicant. And then after the applicant, I'll ask for comments from the representative from the HPC. And I think their chairman is actually joining us tonight. And so, Mr. Manager, Mr. Pace, are we ready to go with this hearing?
Yes, sir, we are.
Madam Clerk, are we ready to go? Mr. City Manager, do you have any comments that you want to make before we start this process?
I do not. Should be ready to go.
Okay. With that, the applicant is Mike Howard. And is there a representative from Mike Howard present at this meeting?
Yes, I'm here, Mr. Mayor.
Oh,
Brandon.
okay, good. Can you identify yourself, please, sir?
Yes, my name is Brandon Goodwin, and I'm the attorney for Mike Howard.
Okay, sir, you've got 10 minutes to explain to City Council your request.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and the rest of City Council. My name is Brandon Goodwin, and I represent Mr. Howard in this appeals process. I want to first start that there are 2 main reasons why we believe that the City Council should reverse the decision of the Historical Preservation Commission and grant Mr. Howard a variance in his case. The 2 main reasons, I'm going to first start with our first reason, is that Mr. Howard's renovations on the property at 500 Florida Ave have transformed a boarded up property that was in disrepair to something that is now a star in that neighborhood in the community for Port Norfolk. It's a beautiful property. He's transformed a $90,000 house into something now. He has recently sold the property now into something worth $280,000. That has increased the curb value of the neighborhood and provided a great historical benefit by restoring the home to its former glory when it was first built in the early 1910s. Mr. Howard has took great expense on himself to restore this home. He now, neighbors have commented to him frequently about how beautiful the home looks and how much it has helped with property values in the neighborhood. The second, I want to turn to the issue of the vinyl windows, of which the commission found issue. The vinyl windows that were installed in the home by Mr. Howard were similar in quality to those that were already in the home when he purchased it and already in neighboring houses. He has, undertaken great expense to repair those windows. And he selected the vinyl windows because they were already used in the home itself and already used in the neighboring community. He has reached out considerably to other people in the community, for example, other vendors of windows and things like that that have more familiarity with the neighborhood. And I see now that Meg has pulled up the pictures, and you can see exactly some of the older windows and things like that on the property. And now he's done extensive work in repairing those their former state. There's a picture of the house now as it exists, and you can see the level of work that Mr. Howard has put into this home and put into the windows to replace them. When he first replaced these windows, many were painted over, boarded out, boarded up, really serving as an eyesore in the historical community. Now he's transformed those with these new vinyl windows that are of similar quality to the ones that the commission even requests in the home, which are vinyl composite, which are of similar.
Sir, could you speak into the microphone, please?
Yes, can you hear me, Mr. Mayor?
Better now. Go ahead.
Okay. I apologize about that. So the windows that he put in the property are of similar quality and similar likeness to that of the vinyl composite windows in which the commission is requesting. The value is not that much different. Mr. Howard, when beginning the renovations on the home, took great lengths to undertake getting permits for the paint colors, for the patio on the back and the front, and things like that. He undertook great lengths to get permits and comply with the guidelines. Despite the fact that the vinyl windows input now are technically against guidelines, he's taking great lengths to seek the permit process, and he would have done so if he knew, but he consulted the neighboring properties, drove around the neighborhood, looked at the windows, consulted window companies in the area. From the original transcript of the hearing at transcript page 32, he highlights just how much he's actually done and how many companies he went to, and that everyone seemed to say they were installing these vinyl windows in many properties. And so his reasonable thing to do at that time was to install these vinyl windows. I think not granting a variance in this case would be very unequitable to Mr. Howard, due to the fact that he's put in great time and expense in turning a boarded up property with painted over windows into something now that's beautiful in the Port Norfolk community, and really stands for what the commission's purpose is in the first place, is to maintain a beautiful historic community. Mr. Howard has provided a great service, I think, to the local community in his neighborhood by providing this beautiful home. And as the last point, I just, as I stated, I think it would be inequitable to now require Mr. Howard to rip out these, windows that are installed in this beautiful home at great expense to himself, to replace them with something that is of similar quality and doesn't actually expend or improve the home very much. This is, would be unequitable to force him to spend this great amount of money to do so. And with that, for those reasons, we conclude that a variance should be granted in this case. In the alternative, we'd be happy to replace maybe the 6 front windows. That seemed to be something that the commission highlighted on, replacing those in the vinyl composite. If the city council decides that that would be the proper remedy, we would be happy to do that. But of course, we still believe that a variance should just be granted for the windows that are in place. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and City Council.
Thank you, sir. Does any member of council have a question for the applicant and his representative, Mr. Goodwin?
Mayor?
Yes, the chair recognizes Councilman Clark.
Thank you, Mayor. Just listening to all the statements that were just given, and part of going to the city to get the proper paint color, I guess I've got some concern, because if they were aware it was historical district to get the color approved, why didn't they have the windows approved? And just going around looking at what somebody else has done and installed, that's not going through the city to ask for the, what's proper, what's supposed to be there. This is not the first time we've had an issue like this. My problem is we've had individuals before, they try to take the cheap way out and then come and ask for forgiveness instead of permission. And that's not the way this historical commission is set up. I'm very familiar with the 500 block of Florida Avenue at the intersection of Cleveland and Florida, because I grew up about 2 blocks away from there. So I remember when Fort Norfolk was first designated a historical district, because I was a child at the time living there. But I just have a problem. If somebody's aware that they need to get the paint color approved because it's historical, they should be aware that they have to get everything else approved. So that's my only statement this time.
Do you have a question for the applicant, though?
Yeah, well, I guess the question is since you went down and asked for the paint colors to be approved with the historical district, why didn't you ask the proper windows that should be installed at the same time?
Right. I'm going to let Mr. Howard answer that question for you. He has factual details regarding that.
Yes, sir. So in doing so, when we actually bought the house, we didn't realize that it was historic. And then later, after owning it, we did. So every time, in order to go down to the Historic Society, when you go into the office and you speak to the people at the front counter, they don't really know answers to a lot of the questions. And you really have to kind of dig deep, sometimes wait and talk to somebody. And sometimes you don't even get the answers that day. When I went in to get the paint colors, also the fence and the patio approved. I was told that those were issues that needed permits. When I was doing the windows, I went to multiple vendors, and I also worked for a company that was a Class A contractor, and they were all telling me that for replacement windows, not I don't really know what the difference is in the replacement windows versus the new windows, but everybody was telling me that for the replacement windows, you don't need any kind of approval because they're replacement. So I went down to Portsmouth City and Glass over there on Portsmouth Boulevard, and they actually gave me the address, which this was over a year ago, so I don't have it anymore, but they gave me 3 addresses for houses that they had done in the neighborhood that were literally on my street, next street over, and they said, and drive around, you'll see all these other ones. So I drove around my neighborhood and I went to the houses that they recommended, and I spoke with 4 different contractors to get prices, and they all told me that for replacement windows, you don't need to do anything. They said they come in and they put them in. So I said, okay, and I hired a company that came in, put the windows in, and then found out because we got a stop work order that that was a problem. And then from that point, we tried to, remedy this.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions from members of council to the applicant? Chair recognizes, I saw the first hand go up, Councilman Glover. Sir, you
Yes,
have the
Mayor.
floor.
Mr. Howard, so just so I'm clear, you didn't go to the proper city agency to verify exactly what windows you needed to put in?
Correct. I actually did make a phone call down to the city, and nobody knew what exactly needed to be done. I went in and I spoke with Sam Oker. I'm not sure his last name. They call him Sampson. Went in and spoke with him on the situation later, and he told me that there were some certain Anderson windows that could be put in. But prior to that, my wife and I went on to the city guidelines, and we were trying to read, basically what was allowed before we even went to these other places. And it's kind of confusing for somebody that doesn't do that kind of thing. And it asks like what tract you live in and just all kinds of questions that I didn't know the answer to. So I assumed that by going to these companies that do this all the time, that you could kind of trust what they're telling you. And it wasn't just one company. I mean, there were multiple companies, and I did the research. Had I known that I needed to do the composite windows, they were only about $100 more per window. And I wouldn't have tried to, cheap out or dance around it if I'm going to get all that other stuff approved. It wasn't, the intent was never to save money or to do something that wasn't allowed.
Mayor, can I ask one other follow-up question to that?
Yes, sir, you may.
Mr. Howard, when were the windows installed? I mean, when were the windows installed?
Back in November, about mid-November of last year.
Okay.
So almost a year ago.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. And the chair recognizes Councilman Battle. Sir, you have the floor.
Mr. Mayor, what did the community think about the home? What did they think? Have they had any complaints?
Is the applicant prepared to answer that question?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So there were quite a few neighbors that would drive by on a regular basis and just compliment the property, especially during Christmas time. We kind of decorated with lights and did different things. And I mean, I had just neighbors driving by. Hey, we love the work. We love what you're doing. It's about time that house finally got some love, because I guess it's been in disrepair for quite a while. But the neighborhood, they love it, especially the people that grew up there and have lived there for a long time. They're very pleased with the outcome of the house.
I'm not finished, Mayor.
Yes, sir.
So we haven't had any formal complaints. Oh, so since we haven't had any formal complaints, I'm going to conclude that ideally we want perfection. But in life, a lot of times we can't or don't get perfection. Now, I don't think that this gentleman's been trying to sleaze or cheese. I think the house it's in wonderful condition. It's beautiful. It's a wonderful sight for the eye. And I think we should realize that we have an imperfect world and we can't always hold the standard of perfection. But we do see that this has been a wonderful job done by this gentleman, and it's uplifting the community. Therefore, I would say that we would grant the waiver.
We're not at that moment yet. Let's hold our discussion until we get a motion on the floor. We're hearing from the applicant, and I'm taking questions, and I recognize Vice Mayor Lisa Lucas Burke. Ma'am, you have the floor.
Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. And Mr. Goodwin, you mentioned that they would look at replacing the front 6 windows as opposed to all of the windows. What is the cost between replacing all of the windows versus replacing the first 6 windows? I think the property is beautiful, but I know that we do have some historic preservation commission requirements that are in there. So I just want to know what the differences in those costs would be.
The price that we had was around $8,200 to do all the windows. Mr. Howard?
That's just for the.
That's just for the front?
That's for the front 6.
The front 6 or the 8,200 number actually is for the front 6 windows. So that would be the cost of doing those windows. The total cost would be
there were 11
pretty
windows.
There was 11 windows in total, so I assume double that. So right around 1,600 mark is what I would assume. Or 16,000. Yes.
Right. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Any other questions from members of council for the applicant? Hearing none, we're ready to hear from the Historic Preservation Commission, and I think we have the representative. Would you introduce yourself, please? You're muted.
My apologies. My name is Renee Schneider. Good evening, Mayor Rowe, Vice Mayor Lucas Burke, esteemed members of council. Again, my name is Renee Schneider, and I'm the current chairwoman for the City of Portsmouth Historic Preservation Commission. At our February 18th, 2020 meeting, we were presented with HPC 20-0025, which is the after-the-fact window replacement at 500 Florida Avenue, which is located in the Port Norfolk Historic District. The homeowner, Mr. Howard, had approximately, as he said, 11 windows replaced with vinyl replacement windows. In addition, he was also requesting to retain windows already replaced prior to his purchase of the home, and that there were additional windows that he would like to have replaced with vinyl. Reiterating what Mr. Howard previously said, through no fault of his own, his contractor did tell him that he did not require a permit. That being said, Mr. Howard had been previously down to the city to require, to investigate and to get permits to do fencing, painting, and other home improvements. So he was aware he was in a historic district and that there were certain restrictions. We understand Mr. Howard's desire to have his home have a uniform look and that there were several different types of windows. But after much discussion, Mr. Howard's application was denied by a vote of 3-2. This was based on the current historic district guidelines for Port Norfolk, which do not allow for vinyl windows. To allow Mr. Howard to retain these windows would in essence negate the historic district guidelines, which are an integral part of the city of code. This in turn would set a precedent that homeowners do not have to follow the guidelines. I hear time and time again, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. We do not wish to punish homeowners trying to improve their homes and the neighborhood they live in. However, we also cannot reward homeowners for not following the guidelines set forth by the city of Portsmouth and approved by city council. I would like to add to that little statement that while I was reviewing this case today, I noticed a discrepancy in what was submitted in the appeal to what was submitted in his application. it seems that, or it appears that 2 additional windows were replaced after the fact of the stop work order. Which being in the case that we had denied him to replace any further windows. I'm not sure, what happened with that, but like I said, the 2 windows, the dormer windows were replaced after our February the 18th meeting and after the denial. Mr. Howard's attorney had brought up that the home was built in 1910s. The home was actually built in 1924 and is actually on the historic register. We were told the house was going to be his residence, and now I'm finding out the house has been sold. We don't take into account the costs. Unfortunately, that's not in our ball field. And he is saying that their vinyl windows, or the vinyl composite windows, which would have been, we were going to recommend wood composite or a vinyl clad window. The district guidelines are extremely clear as to what is allowed and what is not. I ask that you uphold our decision so that we can maintain these guidelines. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Any questions of the chairwoman? Any questions?
Yes, Mayor, I have one.
And-
Yes, the applicant, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. I see 2 questions, and you're first. Madam Vice Mayor, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, ma'am, Ms. Renee.
Yes.
The applicant or the attorney mentioned that there were other homes that have the vinyl composite or vinyl. I remember another case that we deliberated and voted on where these windows were allowed. So how many other homes have gotten a variant?
Yeah, I can personally say that as long as I have been sitting on this commission, we have never approved vinyl windows for Port Norfolk. If there are homes with vinyl windows, they were done prior to the guidelines being met and set, or they were done completely without permission and after, weekend warriors, which is a major problem for these historic districts.
Right. And what year are these guidelines created?
83, I want to say. I believe they're in the process of being reviewed.
Okay.
As we speak. That was something that was being brought up at the end of last year, and then COVID came into effect. So all of that's kind of been put on hold right now, but they are in the process of a study being set up to review them. January, yeah. I do take that back. January 2008 was when the Port Norfolk District guidelines were updated.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And the chair recognizes Councilwoman Simmons and then Councilman Battle. Ma'am, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor. Ms. Schneider,
Yes.
I can't look at it on a Zoom meeting and look at the notes at the same time.
I
Refresh
understand.
me. Yeah. When I read through the transcript of your HPC meeting, I seem to recall that there was quite a bit of discussion about the replacing just the front windows, and I think is that what kind of caused the division in your 3-2 vote?
Yes. We didn't want to punish.
Yeah.
We didn't want to punish.
I guess I did the right word.
We didn't want to punish Mr. Howard for the 3 vinyl windows on the front porch that were there prior to his purchasing. However, we did not want to reward the fact that he had already gone ahead and replaced the rest of the windows. The 2 dormer windows at the top of the property were the old glass slat Julius windows. those were in place at our meeting in February. Those are no longer in place. They have been replaced with 1/1 windows. So work continued even after our meeting, it appears. And I don't know what to say about that one. Like, our division was that we're trying to come up with some kind of compromise, but unfortunately, the compromise would have been approving everything. And
Which
we
you're
did
really
not
not
want to
allowed
do
to do.
that. We did not want to do that.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Councilman Battle. Sir, you have the floor.
Have your agency, miss, ever granted any type of waiver for historical preservation?
A vinyl window?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I said any type of waiver have you ever granted for historical work?
Yes, sir. Not just in Port Norfolk, but we do approve.
I have another question. You answered that question. You said, yes, sir. Is the house a beautiful sight, or is it a raggedy dump?
As I said, Councilman Battle, we're not here to punish homeowners for beautifying their homes.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
And I'm not going to deny, I will not deny, yes, the house is nice and it does look better.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, ma'am.
Any other questions for the vice chair? Bill Moody, Councilman Moody, you have the floor. Councilman Moody, you're muted.
I don't think the fault lies with the applicant or the commission. If you read the guidelines, and I've spoken before this previously, and I think Ms. Snyder touched base on it, the need to review the guidelines. Reading the guideline, it says replace a wood window with a wood window when possible. In Port Norfolk, you may consider using wood rising composite, aluminum, vinyl clad wood. Those are not definite words. May is not a definite word. When possible, what's when possible? I might not have money, so it's not possible. So that the guidelines need to be cleaned up. We're holding people accountable, and to go against the commission, I always feel badly about that, but it's not their fault. Snyder, you inherited the guidelines. You weren't there to create the guidelines. And when the applicant purchased the house, it had all kinds of windows in the house. It had wooden windows, had metal windows, had vinyl windows. It was like a calico cat when it came to windows. So I'm going to support the applicant. And the sooner we can have these guidelines revisited and the wording cleared up, the better off we'll be for the applicants as well as the commission itself. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. I'm still asking for questions for council, and before I go back to somebody that has spoken already,
Well, Mayor,
and wait a minute, sir.
On several occasions, you go back to people, so don't do that. Please don't do that.
I think you misunderstood me, Mr. Battle. I said that I'm still asking for questions from city council. I'm going around the table to see who has their hand up. And the next person who's got their hand up is Councilman Clark. And we can discuss this as long as people have questions. But let's do it one at a time. And let's let those that have not had a chance to speak and ask a question of the vice chair an opportunity. And Mr. Clark, you've got the floor. You have a question?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, sir. Ms.
Okay.
Chairwoman, question, I do believe in the past we have been presented, does the office downtown have samples of the windows that are allowed to be put in the windows in the houses?
I want to say they do.
Well, because the reason I say that, because we've had somebody from your commission come before us in city council in the past with those examples of windows that are allowed. And that's my question. Are those available for individuals that are working on those houses to come downtown and look at those so they know they're getting the right materials?
I believe they are available. I know at one time they were. If they are still available, I'm not sure, but they should definitely be. And that's part of the process when they come in to get the application and fill out the application. They're supposed to submit samples to the city with their application so that if there is a problem with the materials that they choose, it can be brought up then. A lot of times we don't get those samples. Granted, windows are extremely difficult and cumbersome. So if I will check with our liaison to make sure that they do have the proper samples.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. We're still asking questions of Chairwoman Snyder. Does any other member of council have a question? Councilman Battle.
Is it against the law to grant him a waiver? And do we have the authority to?
That's a more appropriate question to the city attorney, and that's why we are having this hearing, because we do have the authority to grant waivers. And to speak to a question that the vice mayor asked, within the last 3 years, we have granted a waiver for vinyl windows in Port Norfolk. It was in the first 100 block of one of the streets that run parallel to Florida. Any other questions of Chairwoman Snyder? All right, hearing none, in the sense of fairness, I'm going to give the applicant 2 minutes to summarize and to answer any rebuttal points. Sir, you have 2 minutes, and I'll be the timekeeper.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just summing up, I definitely want to highlight, points made by Councilman Battle, that the home is just a beautiful, thing on this block. And as you just said, Mr. Mayor, there has been variance granted in these kind of cases. And I think many people speaking have recognized that Mr. Howard, this was not a malicious attempt by Mr. Howard to circumvent the guidelines or circumvent rules. He was trying to get his work done, do it properly. And, and he's represented to me, that these samples aren't made readily available. This is a very hard process for someone who's just trying to work on their home and figure out what exactly is required and Councilman Moody highlighted on it. I think that the guidelines are pretty ambiguous with their language. The may in that language indicates that other things may be used. And when you have a home such as this one, when other windows are in the property, I think that there's a real need to have uniformity. And I think punishing Mr. Howard for that would be the wrong course of action. I think equity and fairness should apply here and should rule here with Mr. Howard when he sees those vinyl windows in his home and he thinks that would be the proper course of action. So again, I just represent that Mr. Howard would request a variance in this case.
Thank you, sir. All right, now to put this matter before us for our consideration, the chair will now entertain a motion to either approve the request or to deny the request.
I move that we approve the request.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, we have a motion on the floor, which is to grant the waiver by approving the request. We're now at the point to discuss the motion. Any discussion on the motion?
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir. You have the floor, Mr. Clark.
Thank you, sir. Well, at the beginning of this, when they were giving their presentation, they were willing to make the compromise to just do the front windows, which is facing Florida Avenue. And they were offering that. I think that would be a good compromise to allow the variance for the rest of the house, but not the front of the house, because that's the point. If we get this variance and, it continue to be done, then we might as well get rid of the historical district because we never followed the guidelines, and that's been going on for years. So either we enforce the rules, or you might as well get rid of them because they're not doing any good.
Okay, further discussion? Councilman Moody?
Mayor, I think it was just revealed that we have approved vinyl windows in the 100 block. So we have been inconsistent, and I think we've been inconsistent because of the guidelines are not precise. So until that is corrected, I don't think we should be punishing the applicant to make him spend additional money because of our unprecise guidelines.
Thank you. And I'm catching members of council as I see them, and Councilman Glover, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to add that it seems like from what I heard, we did have a stop work order. And after the stop work order was put in place, work continued. And I don't know the reasons why work continued, but those processes are in place for a reason. I certainly can appreciate that guidelines have to be reviewed, but when a stop work order is put in place and developers or builders or whatever continue to do the work without it being approved, then that's something that I think is going up beyond what is just a mistake. So I just think that's something interesting, and we've got to make sure that we don't set the wrong precedent as we go forward. And that's all I needed to say.
Thank you, sir. The chair recognizes Councilwoman Simmons and then Councilman Paul Battle. Councilwoman Simmons, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Thank you, sir. I just want to say, I've heard a lot of these appeals over my time, and I have to agree with Mr. Moody. I do not want to see this body see another appeal until we can get these guidelines tightened up. I mean, the commissions have to follow the rules. That's their only course. They don't have the leeway that we do. But if we don't have rules that we're going to enforce, then Councilman Clark is absolutely right. We might as well abolish these commissions. We did have a very strenuous review in 8, 9, or 10 that separated our historic districts so that the guidelines were not the same in Old Town versus Craddock versus Struxton versus Fort Norfolk, which was a big step in the right direction. But even now, we're still having issues with products being available that aren't listed in our guidelines, or us making sure that at least the stores or contractors in Portsmouth, should be well aware. We can't help the ones that aren't scrupulous, but should be well aware that pretty much anything you do to the exterior of a home in these districts has to be approved by these, special rules. So, I'm going to vote to approve this as is, approve this appeal, but it irks me that we haven't tightened up these rules yet. Mr. Moody's absolutely right.
The chair recognizes Councilman Battle. Sir, you have the floor for discussion.
I pass, Mr. Mayor.
You pass?
I'm gonna pass, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Any further discussion? Well, I'll wrap it up. I think that we're beating up on ourselves as far as the regulations are concerned. I think that appeals should be looked at on a case-by-case basis. I have looked at the structure, and to be honest with you, I couldn't tell if they were wooden windows or vinyl, or vinyl over wood. And I'm going to support the motion, not because I think that our regulations need to be tightened up. I don't think that you'll ever get to a point where you're going to shut down appeals. And it's on that basis that that I'm supporting the motion, because I don't think that a person standing on the sidewalk can tell the difference between the type of window. And with that, we have thoroughly discussed it. I thank you all. Ready for the question? This will be a roll call vote. If you're in favor of the motion, please indicate by saying aye. If you're opposed, nay. And Madam Clerk, will you call the vote, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Battle,
Aye.
Mr. Clark,
Nay.
Mr. Glover,
Nay.
Mrs. Lucas Burke,
Aye.
Mr. Moody,
Aye.
Ms. Simmons,
Aye.
Mayor Rowe.
Aye. The motion carries, does it not?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you all for participating. This has been a good discussion. And we now are ready to go to item 2, which is the 2021 state federal legislative packages. These are the proposed packages. Mr. Pace.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, members of City Council, Mrs. Sherry Neal will make this presentation relative to the 2021 state federal legislative package update. Sherry?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Pace. Good evening, Mayor Rowe, Vice Mayor Lucas Burke, members of Portsmouth City Council. It's my pleasure this evening to share with you a high-level summary regarding the ongoing 2020 General Assembly Session Number 1, in which I will highlight some key budget actions and legislative initiatives of local government importance. Following those items, I will present to you some suggestions for your consideration dealing with the upcoming 2021 General Assembly session and the impact of the COVID-19 virus on how procedures and policies may change for the session, as well as considerations we need to take into dealing with the legislative package. Following that, I'll share with you the initiatives for the 2021 legislative General Assembly package. And then next, following that will be suggestions for your consideration as to how to address the policy statements for the upcoming 117th U.S. Congress policy statements. There'll be brief next steps and then opening for questions and answers if you have any. Next slide, please. So, Governor Northam convened the 2020 special session on session 1 on August 18, 2020. The FY 2020 budget had $232 million general fund revenue loss. And this was a 1.1% lower than the adopted budget forecast, which triggered a required revenue reforecast. So the COVID-19 pandemic budget impacted. So he pulled together the special session to address the budget impact due to COVID and related legislative initiatives, as well as criminal justice and police reform initiatives, which are being addressed across the nation at all of the state houses in the United States. However, there was tension between the leadership of the House and the Senate, which led to a failure of adopting a joint resolution outlining procedures for the special session. Therefore, there are no dates set for when it's supposed to end. There was no procedures put in place on how they were going to operate. So we have been following this and operating in uncharted territory. Therefore, the special session continues. The House and Senate is now considering each other's bills. Some have been placed in conference, as well as considering the budget amendments, which will be heading to conference. Due to the ongoing pandemic, all of the committee meetings are being held virtually, similar to this. Only the full Senate floor meetings are being conducted in person with the use of masks and social distancing. And the Senate is meeting in the Science Museum because of the space there for their meeting. However, that's impacted by other events that may be already scheduled for the Science Museum. For example, they had to stop meeting after Wednesday of last week because of a wedding that was scheduled to be held there. And they won't come back into meeting again until Wednesday tomorrow. So that's slowing down budget negotiations and dealing with the bills as well. The House is holding all of their meetings virtually, including their floor sessions. And this may be a precursor of how the 2021 regular session of the Virginia General Assembly will operate. But I'll touch on that last item a little bit later when I discuss considerations of the COVID impact on the upcoming General Assembly session with you. Next slide, please. So again, as I was stating a minute ago, the FY 2020 had a $232 million general fund revenue loss, which triggered the reforecasting. And so the governor, the House, and the Senate have all submitted amendments to the 2022 budget, biennium budget. The impact of the pandemic on the FY 21-22 portion of the budget is resulting in a forecast of about a $2.7 billion reduction due to slower general fund revenue growth forecasting. And the August general fund reforecast reduces it by that amount, again, because of a lower starting dates and reductions in the 2021 growth forecast. The FY 21-22 House and Senate differ on how to spend the 490. I'm sorry, I skipped something. Forgive me. But both the House and the Senate have identified similar amounts of savings for the FY20 budget. So while we only had a $232 million shortfall, which was a lot less than was initially anticipated, it was offset by $277 million in agency savings for unspent balances. Now, the FY 21-22 House and Senate do differ on how to spend the $490.5 million unappropriated balance that was in the governor's proposed budget or his contingency funds. The House is spending about $180 million or 207,000 million, and the Senate spending about 222 million of these unappropriated balance. The governor has stated that he will not sign a budget if any of the contingency funding is included. One of the things that both of the House and the Senate budget amendments do agree upon at this time is use of the gray machine taxes, 95.95 million, and they want to use it to offset the sales tax losses to bolster school budgets that are already in play. There are some differences there between the House and the Senate, two of them being that the changes of the formulary for distribution from the number of machines that are located in a locality, which is how the law was originally written and the language in the budget was originally agreed upon in March, to the amount of tax losses in the locality. And also the Senate is allotting this amount of money to come from the local share of the gray machine taxes and not the state share. So that'll all have to be worked out in conference as well. Also, the House and Senate are having different approaches on how to allocate the remaining $1.3 billion of the Federal CARES Act funding, which was granted to the state. And this must be allocated by the end of this year or it reverts back to the federal government. As of Thursday of last year, the governor allocated $262 million of these funds. He gave $220 million to K-12 to cope with the pandemic. Portsmouth is scheduled to receive about $2,327,000 of those dollars. He also allocated $30 million to fast-track broadband projects for underserved areas, which would include our Portsmouth, and that initiative was launched on the 9th of October. And he also allocated $12 million more for rent and mortgage relief for the COVID-19 impacted citizens. Next slide, please. So I'm now going to touch on a couple of the legislative items that are of importance to local governments. The first one being the utility disconnect. And these are the three bills that were addressing it. Senate Bill 5118 was referred to as the stakeholders bill due to the amount of input and compromises that was reflected in the bill from all the stakeholders of it. But although it did pass the Senate, it never was heard in the House. So in effect, it died in the House. So the language in the budget is going to drive how the utility disconnect situation is going to be addressed. So House Bill 5005 is the budget amendment bill for the House, and usually the House bill is the vehicle for the budget. Senate Bill 5015 has some budget amendments from the Senate and also contains some of the governor's budget amendments. Both bills include identical language that's banning utility disconnections, including municipalities for COVID-19 impacted consumers. But the utilities must offer a repayment plan for the arrearages at the end of the disconnect moratorium. In the House budget, there's a provision included for the municipal utilities to exempt them from this disconnection moratorium if the arrearages of the accounts are greater than 1 or 2% of the overall operating revenue. However, this language is only effective in the current biennium budget unless it is included in the upcoming budget that the governor introduces in December. The House budget amendments also appropriates $120 million of the CARES Act funding to help pay down some of the customers' accounts with arrearages due to the pandemic, but this is not included in the Senate amendments or in the governor's budget amendments. Next slide, please. The next item would be the Civilian Review, or the also called the Civilian Oversight Board, which is part of the police reform legislation. The House and the Senate have conformed their bills to their respective versions, meaning that the House changed the Senate bill to match the House's bill, and then the Senate did the same thing to the House bill when it came over to the Senate. So the major differences between the two bills right now is that the House bill is making these boards mandatory, while the Senate still keeps them as optional. And the major similarities is that the House and the Senate bills both provide an outline for the duties of these boards to undertake, while localities are supposed to establish their operating policies and procedures for the performance of the duties. Also, the House and the Senate bills do allow these boards to retain legal counsel, and both bills provide that the local governments pay for this service. Next slide, please. The Omnibus Police Reform Bill, Senate Bill 5030, is very comprehensive, and it covers several of the standalone House bill initiatives listed here, and I'm not going to speak about each of them, but it includes all of these items. The Senate bill was amended in the House to remove the language that said that a locality would lose its H599 funds, which is your police fund money, if the locality does not comply with data reporting requirements and in department certifications. And that is what that language is included in the Senate version. So both versions of this bill are now in conference. Next slide, please. Then there is the Crisis Intervention and Community Responses Team, House Bill 5043 and Senate Bill 5038. The House is requiring the establishment of these regional mental health awareness response teams, otherwise known as the Marcus Alert System, and community response teams, which are going to be a combination of law enforcement and mental health professionals to deal with certain calls. In the House bill, there's a phased-in method to developing these teams across the Commonwealth over a 6-year period. And the House bill also provides that these teams will be led by mental health service providers, including registered peer recovery specialists and law enforcement. Work groups comprised of the stakeholders, state and local advocate representatives, are supposed to examine the crisis intervention training or CIT programs and initiatives by July of next year. On the other hand, the Senate took a different approach, and it does not include a phased-in system, but it sped up the creation of this system. And it provides for the development of protocols instead of a single response model. And it also requires every locality to be served by a market system by July of 22. And by July of next year, every locality shall have established database for individuals with behavioral health, mental illness, developmental or intellectual disability, or brain injuries. And these bills are now in conference as well. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned before, there's some considerations that need to be taken into account. I present them here for your consideration, or suggestions rather, due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, and it's creating special circumstances and constraints. And this includes cancellation of the annual City Council General Assembly Delegation Legislative Meeting. We generally have this every year about this time of the year prior to adoption of our legislative package. However, with the COVID-19 and the special session that still lingers on, the recommendation here is that the City Council consider just foregoing it for this particular year due to the situations I just mentioned. Also, we generally submit our legislative packages in a booklet format, but here I'm suggesting that we do it electronically rather than on printed booklets. Just today I heard on the news, some scientists are saying that the COVID-19 virus is showing that it lasts longer on paper, like money and bills and things and that, longer than they thought it did. So to prevent the spread of any virus, I'm suggesting that we only submit it electronically. Now, on the other hand, as far as our legislative package, considering the amount of items we ask for, consider limiting that number of items. I took into consideration limiting the number of items we put forward because the House and the Senate are considering limiting the number of bills that they can pre-file, and that can be filed after the pre-file deadline. And those bills, that number of bills is going to include state agency and commission bills, the governor's bills, and the legislator's personal legislative initiatives. They haven't come up with a number yet. It has still going back and forwards, but compounding that is that there's also some discussion floating around that there's a possibility that the upcoming regular session, which is the short session, and is generally 45 days, may be shortened to 30 days because of the pandemic. Now, pre-filing began in July, and it ended November. And just to highlight the uncertainty that we're dealing with right now, at this point in time, only 2 constitutional amendments have been submitted and 2 bills for the 2021 session. Therefore, also, the legislative committees may continue to meet virtually with testimony provided in the same manner, and contact with legislators and staff will be severely limited, if allowed at all. Contact with the legislators may have to be through telecommunication methods such as this, with video chats, phone calls, and possibly meeting with them, if possible, in their home offices when they return on the weekends. Next slide, please.
Sherry.
Yes, sir.
Your presentation is very good, and in the interest of time, though, we have 2 people that we're interviewing for boards and commissions. I think it's important that we continue the discussion on this at our next meeting, because we're getting into what we might want to include into our legislative program for the 2021 session. I think one takeaway is the tradition of meeting with our legislative delegation and having a dinner. We did not do that in 2020, and I think it's good to stop the tradition as of 2019 for a lot of reasons. One is that we see our members quite frequently, often daily in the session. Plus, when we invite them to dinner, it becomes a reportable event for them on their conflict of interest. So I think what the council needs to discuss that. What I'd like to do is let's pause your presentation here, because we've got the 2 interviewees that have been patiently waiting for the last half an hour. We go into closed session to do those interviews. We'll come back out, and if we have time, we'll go through the rest of the items that we had put on the work session agenda. If we don't complete them by 7, we'll add them to the end of the regular session.
That's
So,
fine.
good. In the interest of politeness to our people that we've asked to show up tonight for interviews, uh, let's entertain a motion to go into closed session, and I'll ask the clerk to read that motion, and then if someone from council would make that motion. Madam Clerk?
Yes, sir. A move to go into closed electronic meeting pursuant to Virginia Code subsections 2.2-3708.2, A.3, and 2.2-3711A1, and City Council Ordinance 2020-21 for the purpose of discussing, considering, and interviewing prospective candidates for and appointees to boards and commissions.
Is there a member of council that will make that motion?
So moved.
Move for approval.
Is there a second?
Second. Second.
All right, we have a motion that's been duly made and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? This will be a roll call vote. Madam Clerk, will you call the vote, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Battle,
Yes.
Mr. Clark,
Yes.
Mr. Glover,
Yes.
Mrs. Lucas Burke,
Yes.
Mr. Moody,
Yes.
Ms. Simmons,
Yes.
Mayor Rowe.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are now in closed meeting. We'll come back out and consider the appropriate certification. We're back in open session. We need to consider a motion to certify that we only discuss those things that were allowed under the law in our motion. And I'll ask the clerk to read the certification and then ask if there's a member of council wants to make that motion. Madam Clerk.
Yes, sir. A move that each council member certify that to the best of his or her knowledge, 1, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements under the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, and 2, only such public business matters as were identified in the motion by closed meeting was convened, were heard, discussed, or considered in the closed meeting just concluded.
Is there such a motion? Is there a second?
So moved.
Is there a second? Okay, we have a
Second.
motion on the floor that's been duly made and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? None. This will be a roll call vote. If you're in favor of the motion, please indicate by voting aye. If you're opposed, nay. Madam Clerk, will you call the vote, please?
Yes, sir. Mr. Battle,
Aye.
Mr. Clark,
Aye.
Mr. Glover,
Aye.
Mrs. Lucas Burke,
Aye.
Mr. Moody,
Aye.
Ms. Simmons,
Aye.
Mayor Rowe.
Aye. And Madam Clerk, that motion carries.
Yes, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have 6:41. We will start our regular session at 7. So we've got about let's say 15 minutes to continue our work session. And with that, let's go to CARES funding. And Mr. City Manager, do you have a report on the CARES funding?
Yes, Mayor, I do.
All right.
Mayor, members of City Council, Vice Mayor, Ms. Terry will provide an update relative to the CARES Act, second round distribution, and thank you supplements for Portsmouth City employees. Ms. Terry.
And this is for the people watching. This is the city's chief financial officer. Ma'am, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good evening, Honorable Mayor, Honorable Vice Mayor, City Council members, administration, executive team, and others. At Council's request through the interim city manager, I am providing an update for the CARES Act frontline pay for eligible employees. At Council's request, I'm also providing information and seeking approval for Council on a thank you one-time bonus to employees as an act of appreciation for their dedication and hard work, which will be funded through the general fund. Department heads submitted names for individuals or employees based on the criteria and positions within each unit. The Frontline CARES Act hazard pay has been initiated and dispersed on October 9th, 2020 to eligible employees. The thank you bonus. City Council members mentioned in the September meetings that they wanted to consider a one-time thank you bonus to the employees that did not meet the criteria to receive the frontline hazard payment through CARES Act funding. With Council's permission to explore the request through the interim city manager, a plan of action has been outlined and identified to provide the bonus to the remaining city employees. The exclusions being considered are elected officials, appointed judges and magistrates, commissioners serving on boards and commissions, and employees who have already received frontline hazard pay through CARES. Note, if there are any part-time employees who are not actively and currently working due to and during the pandemic, they will be excluded as well. Department heads will be required to identify these employees for exclusion. $500 to full-time employees, $250 to part-time employees. The estimated cost to the general fund would be $1.2 million. However, the estimated cost will be lower due to exclusion of non-working part-time employees once identified. Any funds not expended will return to fund balance. If the desire of council is to move forward, a determination is being requested by ordinance for bonus payments for employees. The one-time bonus payment, again, will be funded through the general fund. This includes my presentation. Any questions?
Any member of council have any questions? Councilman Moody.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, I want to bring to your attention and my colleagues' attention of the $1,500 request from our retirees, public safety retirees, of the $1,500 stipend or bonus that they've requested. They too, the widows, widowers, they've endured a hardship during this time as well. And I think that this council needs to recognize that and grant the $1,500 in their request.
I had identified that as a item that we were going to discuss in our work session, that along with the wage increase that was in the 2021 budget,
That's
along
fine.
with the water line in West Norfolk. So let's focus on this. And if we don't get to these items during the work session, we'll pick them up under new business or old business or items brought up by council and the agenda. And I'm getting feedback, so can you mute yourself, please? Any other questions? Councilwoman Simmons. Okay.
Yes, sir. Ms. Terry, if I've read the ordinance correctly, this one-time thank you bonus does include employees of our constitutional officers. So that would include the deputies and folks that work in the treasurer's office and the commissioner's office and the Commonwealth Attorney's office.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Councilman Battle. You're muted, sir.
Was there any COVID monies left or available?
There are COVID funds available, but in regards to meeting the criteria, they did not meet the criteria for the one-time bonus, if that's what you're asking. I mean, for the hazard pay. Are you just asking overall, was there any money still available for CARES?
Well, I'm confused because I thought that anybody involved in the COVID situation with the city, especially the sheriff's department and the different departments you've named, is it the reason why we don't want to do that, or is it I'm not understanding. We have a lot of latitude with those funds. Are we holding them back for some reason, another reason or something?
They
Paul,
were, okay. I'm sorry,
to,
Mr. Mayor.
to answer your question, we asked the city manager to
We,
city council, okay, to go back and look at those people who qualify, and he's come back with he's added the sheriff's deputies, for example. But there's a group of employees that don't qualify. They cannot be paid with these federal funds. And that's what the bonus is about. We're going to pay them with city money. We asked the city manager to come up with a plan to do just that. And that's what they're presenting today. So everybody that does qualify for COVID federal funds will get paid with federal funds. Those that don't qualify, and the guidelines are pretty strict, we're going to pay them with city funds. Is that correct? Okay.
well, as long as we give them something.
Yes, sir.
I'll live with that one.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you so much. I think we're prepared. All right. While you're there, though, in case the city manager, we had approved a 3% increase with the adoption for our general wage employees with the adoption of the 2021 budget. Upon the recommendation of the city manager, we delayed implementing that until we understood the ramifications of the COVID-19 pandemic on our budget. We talked about delaying it for the first quarter. We're now not ending, the end of the first quarter comes, let's say July, August, September. The first quarter is ended. And so the question now is, are we in a financial position that we can go ahead and implement the 3% increase that was approved by council with the adoption of the budget? Mr. City Manager.
Mayor, to answer your question, we revisited this, and I'm going to ask Ms. Terry to give you a brief update relative to what we found.
So with the 3% increase, that can happen at what we desire to happen as at the beginning of a full payroll. So it is up to council when they would like to implement the 3%. You could do it at any time. You could do it, I think the city manager's wishes was January, the beginning of the calendar year. But of course, this is at the discretion of council. So if you would like to move forward with the 3% increase to employees, the first full payroll in November is what I would suggest we do this, or anytime after.
Thank you, ma'am. And I assume that you concur with that, Mr. City Manager. But with that, can we have a consensus to instruct the city manager to go ahead and release those funds for the first payroll in November?
Yeah.
Anybody opposed to that? You need to mute your mic. Mute. Anybody opposed? All right. Mr. City Manager, if you will go ahead and implement the 3% increase effective the first payroll in November.
It is done.
Okay. We had, and maybe this might do best at the end of the meeting. We've been working for 2 hours. Let's take these other items, which is the retirement, the utilities for West Norfolk, and the recruiting process for the city attorney. Let's put that under items submitted by council under our regular agenda. Let's go ahead and close out the closed session to give everybody a chance to take a break and our IT department to get ready for our 7 o'clock regular meeting. Everybody in agreement with that? I see nobody disagreeing, so I will bring this meeting of the Portsmouth City Council, a public work session, to a close. This work session is now adjourned, and the City Council will reconvene at 7 p.m. for its regular council meeting that's scheduled at 7 p.m. October the 13th, 2020. Thank you.